Welcome to Enhancing the Human Experience, where it's all about helping you create and live your best life. So in this episode 48, we're going to be talking about the most important thing. And this episode comes in conjunction with a new tool that I've created and is available on my website, gmarkphillips.com, to help you very quickly realign with all the positive things in your life and all the things that are going right and ultimately make over your life. It's called the 5-Minute Makeover, and you can pick it up on my website. I'll have links below this podcast if you're listening on YouTube or any of the other venues to go check that out. But it's a very simple tool that will help you get back in touch with the things you want in life and turn back towards that positivity that is really so crucial in all of life. And this episode talks about the first component of that tool. And it is, in fact, the most important thing, just as the title suggests. And what that is to align with the source of all creation, divine intelligence, God, whatever you call that entity or that thing that is ultimately behind all of the actions in the universe and ultimately animates all of the other animals and creatures on earth and the plants and the trees. Everything is vibrant and alive with this energy. And the reason we want to align with that is because many people have talked about this. When we're disconnected from the source of creation, that energy, our lives won't work as well as they can when we are connected. And on the far side of the spectrum, our lives can be really, really crappy if we are very disconnected from that, right? Because we're always seeking that connection with the source of all creation. That's kind of what human beings, they draw subtle and not so subtle energies from connection with that source. This is where you get your yoga. This is where you get meditation and prayer. All those things are our ability, our tools to connect with that source of creation that is so vital to living an exceptional life and getting what we want in life and doing our work in life and moving past all the limitations that are inherent in race mind, right? So that's why I named it as number one. There's 5 steps to this 5-minute life makeover, and that is the very first one. Everything flows from that because if we're disconnected from that, nothing else is going to work downstream. So it's kind of like plugging in an appliance to an outlet. If you're not plugged in to the source that created you, then nothing else will work. You go through a lot of motions, but nothing will work. And the other impetus for this podcast, this episode, came because as I was creating this tool, I was rethinking about the story of the Rainmaker with Carl Jung. And that is exactly what the Rainmaker does. I will put a link to the podcast I did on the Rainmaker, which I read the story of the Rainmaker and talked more in depth about that story and its profound implications for helping you get the most out of life. But the synopsis is the Rainmaker arrives, in this village that is in severe drought, who has hired him to make the rain, and he goes into his tent for 4 days. On the 5th day, it starts to rain. So the villagers are asking him, hey, this is crazy. What did you do? You came into your tent. It looks like you've done nothing, but yet the rains came. And the Rainmaker said, well, when I arrived in your village, I noticed that it was out of harmony with heaven. And so I put myself in harmony with heaven during those 4 days, and then the rains came. That's how profound doing this can be. For you on your journey into whatever you're doing, whatever your goals and desires are in life, if you don't align yourself with the divine, with heaven, and radiate with that energy and have that essence within you, you're not going to get as great of results. And ultimately, you might be in a really deep drought for a long time. So that's the power of it. And that's kind of the inspiration for this episode of the podcast, is based on the Rainmaker. And so what our task is to essentially become the Rainmaker and do what the Rainmaker did. And we've got to do it every morning. This is the renewing of the mind that is so critical. Just like Zig Ziglar, famous motivational expert, said that you've got to renew your motivation every day because it wears off. We've got to re-inspire ourselves. We've got to re-motivate ourselves. And most importantly, being the most important thing, we have to reconnect with that source of creation that we're part of, but we lose the connection. We unplug it somehow during the course of the day as we get totally consumed in race consciousness and in this world consciousness. And we forget that that's where our real power comes from. And this is where I believe the statement, be still and know, comes from. Because the more we're doing in the real world and taking all this massive action to try to get what we want, if we're unplugged from the source, it's just never going to work. It never works. And I don't know about you, but I can definitely speak for this in my own life, where you're doing so much and you're not making any headway because you're not aligned with the source of all creation that is powering you and everything else. So when you take that moment to be still and know and align yourself, just a few moments, right? And get the consciousness of God consciousness, divine consciousness, source consciousness, by thinking about, what would God do? What would the source do in this case? What would source think? What would divine intelligence, what kind of quality would they bring to this activity that I'm doing, right? This is what it is. Aligning ourselves is simply aligning our consciousness with God consciousness or with divine intelligence consciousness, because you are mind, right? Everything flows from your conditioned state of consciousness. So what I mean by aligning with and getting in congruence with is aligning your consciousness with that and transcending the limited ideas and notions that you may have about the world and adopting those of a larger purpose, of a larger entity, which is the God consciousness. Now, this is also the thing that Kabbalists talk about, and they say, one of their major tenets in Kabbalah is that the goal is to be like God. Now, having said that, I don't think anyone ever is going to get there, right? That's a huge, tall order, but that's our goal, because then everything's going to flow nicely, right? And when I say God, I also mean, of course, source consciousness, divine intelligence, however you find more resonance with that term, whatever term you want to use for it, use that, because otherwise you may have some resistance to that. But ultimately, that's what we're doing, and that's a good representation of what we're doing, is doing what Kabbalists say, be like God. And then everything will flow nicely. How would God approach this task? How would God do this? How would Source do this, right? Whatever's going to help you transcend any limitations or resistance or blockages to creating prosperity, to doing the thing, to showing up in the world in the best way possible to get the results that you want, right? Because we're never going to get better results approaching our day with the same consciousness we had from the day prior. It's just not going to happen. Unfortunately, a lot of us, myself included, do that on a daily basis and think, well, why isn't my life getting any better, right? Well, because we're not getting any better. We're approaching the day the same way we approached the other 5 days prior, and the same circumstances and results are going to come about. It's common sense, but it doesn't seem common sometimes, right? So my suggestion, and part of this tool, is to do that every morning, right? Reconnect with the source. And there's 4 other steps on this 5-minute life makeover to help you, like it says, make over your life in a very quick period of time. But it has to be done every morning, because this is, again, the renewing of the mind, renewing of the consciousness, and aligning with that ultimate divine consciousness. So the tool, you can find the tool at my website, free, gmarkphillips.com. It's very simple. It's 1 page. I'm a big fan, if you're familiar with my work, of not complicating it, not putting a lot of fluff and filler in there, because I know that you don't have time for that. And frankly, I don't want to waste my time putting that in there. So no fluff, no filler, all down to business, just a simple, concise tool that will help you make over your life in a very short period of time. So you can check it out on my website, gmarkphillips.com. All right, well, that is the most important thing, aligning with the divine, aligning with heaven, God, source, very first thing in the morning, and letting that consciousness flow into all of your activity all day long. I really feel that it's very vital to living a successful life and helping you get what you want out of life, because you're using that consciousness, right? You're using that power, which incidentally, human beings are the only creatures that have the ability to harness and focus that power. All of the other animals are driven by instinct, and they don't have the imagination quality or the God consciousness within us to imagine situations, to align themselves with situations. So you got access to this huge source of power, of divine power. You might as well use it. And this is how you use it. All right. That's the show. I want to thank you for tuning in today. Until next time, all the best, health, wealth, and success. Bye-bye.